Okay, how's this? Now can you hear me, everyone? All right. So let me see if there's anything else I need to talk about just to introduce our exciting speaker today. We're so happy to have her here, Heather Stapleton. She graduated from Indiana University with majors in environmental studies, political science, and French with an area concentration of public affairs. Upon graduation, she was a Peace Corps volunteer in Benin, West Africa for 3 years. Heather was the education director at the Environmental Learning Center for 16 years. Now Heather is one of 3 new community engagement coordinators for One Lagoon, the Indian River Lagoon National Estuary Program. She's been leading sea turtle walks in the Archie Carr National Wildlife Refuge for 20 summers. When Heather is not in nature, nor in a museum, she's likely to be singing with a local choir. Heather?
Hello, everyone, and to all of those out there in virtual world as well. We're trying a live stream for this event today, so it's a hybrid event. It's my first time getting to speak at a hybrid event, so this is exciting. So thank you for the invitation. Ray and I were talking about if you have questions, if you can wait till the end, great. But if it's a burning question and you feel like you're not going to be able to remember it to the end, please feel free to interrupt. I think with this size audience, we can keep it really casual today. So if something's just burning and you need to know, I hope I can answer it. Today we're going to be discussing not only what's ailing the Indian River Lagoon, but perhaps even more importantly, what are the solutions to help bring it back to health? I know that's what everybody wants to focus on, what we all can do. And so that'll be a big part of my presentation today. So the Indian River Lagoon was designated as one of 28 national estuaries back in the early 90s. And to be designated as a national estuary and to have a national estuary program, you have to have a host agency. And for the longest time, our original host agency was St. John's River Water Management District. The thing about St. John's, though, is they are in charge of 18 counties. And when the lagoon health got dramatically poor, we realized that if we wanted the Indian River Lagoon to get the kind of attention that it really needed, that program needed a hyper focus. And so it was pulled out from St. John's, and a new entity was created called the Indian River Lagoon Council. I'll talk a little bit more about its makeup later. But basically, the council is a special district of the state, non-taxing, non-regulatory, and we're all about consensus building, bringing everyone to the room, whether you're homeowners, just interested citizens, scientists, politicals, the staffs of local government. If you have a stake in the lagoon, we want you at the table. But in order to get you to the table, we better understand what a lagoon is in the first place, because I do get lots of questions, and I know a lot of old-timers still refer to it as the river. I hope that I can convince you perhaps to start calling it the lagoon instead. It's long and it's narrow, and so I can certainly see why the Spanish named it Rio de Ice, River of the Ice Indians. The Ice Indians were the Native Americans that the Spanish first encountered. The Ice Indians had already been living here and already using the Indian River Lagoon for many hundreds of years prior to the Spanish arriving. I love how the Spanish can supposedly discover something even though there were already people already living here. And it's thanks to the Indian River Lagoon and the bounty of the Indian River Lagoon that the Ice Indians spent a lot less time thinking about survival. Certainly didn't need to think about surviving through the winter. And that bounty actually allowed them to do things like create a rudimentary government, create art, play games. And so those people we know about because, one, the Europeans actually did encounter them, and they left a lot of evidence behind in the middens that are around the lagoon. And so the Spanish named it Rio de Ice. It was a long, skinny body of water. And it's brackish, a mixture of salt and fresh, so the closer you are to things like the St. Lucie River or the St. Sebastian River, the more fresh that water will become. The closer you are to an inlet proper, the saltier that water will become. And it fluctuates, and that's natural. Of course, our inlets naturally would have opened and closed with storm activity. And so the way the inlets are now, that's actually not natural. And we're putting a lot of fresh water into the lagoon that is also not natural. All of those canals and ditches that lead to the lagoon, that actually increased the amount of land draining into the lagoon by 147%. So there's a lot more land that drains into the lagoon than would have been here naturally. And then what distinguishes our type of estuary, a place where salt and fresh water mix together, as a lagoon is the presence of a barrier island. And so unlike Chesapeake Bay or Tampa Bay, we don't open straight out into the ocean. The little bit of exchange that we do have with the ocean comes directly through those inlets. And despite the fact that we have inlets, and those do let salt water in, really the tidal influence only extends about 7 miles from any of those inlets that you see on my map. And so local papers don't do me much favor by listing like high tide at the Barber Bridge, for example, because that could actually be negated by what the wind is doing. So our prevailing wind patterns are from the southeast. So typically the water in the lagoon does move to the north, but when we get those few cool fronts that do come through, the water will move the other direction. And sometimes it looks, in the middle of the summer, for example, when we've had very strong southeast winds, in our part of the lagoon, it almost looks like somebody pulled the plug out of the tub, you know? And then I think back to my experience at the canoe dock at the ELC. In the summer, we had this beautiful loading platform that was never wet, and in the winter, the loading platform was underwater. So that tidal influence is not very strong. There are exceptions, of course, seasonal exceptions to that, and you will see. So in the fall and spring, the tide is strong enough such that the wind doesn't negate the effects of tide. And all of this evidence means this is truly a lagoon and not a river. A river always flows the same direction. In the northern hemisphere, that is usually from the north to the south, although Florida is so darn flat that we tend to forget the rules of gravity around here. The St. Johns River flows north for 310 miles, which is not usual. The south, and more locally, the south prong of the St. Sebastian River also flows from south to north until it finally turns east towards the lagoon. And so what all this means is, unlike a river, a lagoon rarely has a chance to truly dump itself out. And so there's no true flushing, and so kind of what happens in the lagoon stays in the lagoon. And this thing is going really slowly. And so over time, our legacy load, all of the activities that we've been doing that affect the lagoon, that's all referred to as our legacy load. So for years and years and years, everything that we've done on land that has made its way into the lagoon, mostly due to stormwater runoff, has created a problem. And so you will hear about our legacy load quite a bit. If you hadn't already heard the phrase, now that you have, be listening for that phrase in other conversations. A lot of times, not with the green team, but a lot of times money is more important to folks than just the intrinsic value of nature. And so not only is the lagoon just amazing and beautiful and a place to recharge and a place to enjoy, but it also has a very strong economic value. And that's at $7.6 billion. And this study is a little bit dated at this point. It was from 2016. My program will be launching a new one of these economic evaluation studies soon. But the gist of this study is that if the lagoon were healthier, we could expect that number to be higher. If the lagoon were less healthy, we could expect it to be lower. And when this study was done was kind of right before things started getting really bad. So it'll be interesting to see with the new study what happens to that number. But the gist of it is the Indian River Lagoon is still an economic driver for the 5-county region, and just as important as other economic drivers. And another interesting thing that we've discovered is that really it's the return on investment. For every dollar that we put into restoring the health of the lagoon, it's estimated that we'll get $33 in return. And I don't know where else you can get that kind of ROI. That's pretty impressive. So this all kind of starts with seagrass. So we're going to start with seagrass, and we're going to start in about the year 2000, the late 2009, early 2010. We were experiencing a multi-year drought, and at the same time, we had those really strange winters of 2009. So the end of 2009, the beginning of 2010, that winter, and then again that last winter of 2010. I don't know if you remember, but all of the tropical species were suffering at that time. Dead fish everywhere. Sea turtles were stranding. We are precisely where the temperate zone and the subtropical zones mix. And so all of those subtropical animals could not deal with water temperatures in the lagoon that got to 42 degrees. It was almost unheard of. We had experienced something similar about 100 years prior. So it wasn't totally unheard of, but like I said, it had been 100 years. Okay, so the multi-year drought meant that some areas of the lagoon had this dramatic increase in salinity, which is neither good nor bad. It just is. It's just what was happening. So as you can imagine, when you have less fresh water going into the lagoon, it means that that water was becoming higher in salinity. So for example, when you have less rain in the summer, you can experience a few days of higher salinity, and then it rains and kind of renormalizes, but that wasn't happening in a drought. And some areas of the lagoon were actually saltier than the ocean, which is also neither good nor bad, it just is. So, but those cold winters meant that we had all this dead, decaying matter that was building up in the lagoon. Volunteers, municipalities did our best to get as much of the dead fish up and out to the landfills as we could, but a fish can only float for so much time before it just becomes mush, and then it became impossible. And so all of that stuff started sinking to the bottom of the lagoon and accumulating there. And what that started to do was actually create toxic situations at the bottom. We refer to that as the benthos. And so the seagrass had matter just accumulating on it, and it was creating a potentially bad situation for the roots and the rhizomes of the seagrass as well. Have you ever seen that algae that just kind of moves around in the lagoon? To me, it kind of looks like a tumbleweed. That is a drift algae that is extremely important for the lagoon. It acts as a nutrient shock absorber. Well, guess what? Those cold temperatures also killed our nutrient shock absorber just at a time when we could have really used that nutrient shock absorber. It also died. And so normally it helps take up nitrogen and helps keep things in balance, but we lost that during the cold temperatures. Is everybody with me so far? Okay. So this high salinity set the stage for a micro phytoplankton, so a little tiny microscopic plant that happens to thrive in high saline conditions, set the stage for it to do well. And we have all these nutrients building up because we've lost our shock absorber. And at the same time, now we're even getting toxic hydrogen sulfide on the benthos on the bottom of the lagoon. So that rotten egg smell that can be natural in the summer, we were experiencing that not in the summer, and we were experiencing that all over the lagoon, not in just a few locations. And so all of those conditions, which had kind of been set in motion by those really two cold winters, led to what we referred to at the time as a phytoplankton superbloom. We now know that it can get even worse, but we had never seen a phytoplankton bloom like this previously. And it shaded out seagrass. the water looked like, I don't know, green Kool-Aid or green, some kind of very artificial green, lit drink. And sunlight could get through, but not a lot. Remember, seagrass is a plant, so it has to photosynthesize. And so this phytoplankton started shading out the seagrass, which led to about a 45% loss in seagrass. And this particular phytoplankton bloom went all the way from the northern stretches of the lagoon to just south of the Sebastian Inlet. And because nothing ever sits still in nature, we did not just stop with this event. This event then led to subsequent events, and that was this phytoplankton greedily gobbled up all of those nutrients. It was thriving. It was doing quite well until it finally gobbled up all that it needed, and then it kind of set the stage for this brown algae to then take over. And this particular brown algae can thrive in low nutrient conditions. So we had these extremely high nutrient conditions that the green phytoplankton gobbled up until it did itself in, essentially. And then the brown algae was able to outcompete. And that brown algae had never previously been recorded in the Indian River Lagoon. We also had never been looking for it previously. So what we don't know, is it a minuscule but natural part of the lagoon, or did it come in through ballast water or something like that? We don't actually know. But what we do know is that this brown algae is a survivor, and it really caused even more shading event. The water looked almost like chocolate milk. It was disgusting. And we lost even more seagrass. And what we know, based on the experience now and the experience of Laguna Madre in Texas, is that true recovery might take decades. So imagine if every day for 60 years, we did nothing but eat cheeseburgers and M&Ms, and then all of a sudden, we think that we're going to get healthy because a few weeks we start eating salads. It's not going to work that way, and it's the same way with the lagoon. You cannot mistreat something year after year after year, start working on it, and expect immediate results. And that's a tricky thing for us to all keep in mind, is that this recovery process is underway, and it's going to take a long time. And what makes it tricky to remember all that is, if you thought my graphics were a little challenging, take a look at this. Yes, this is comedic relief, but although we find it humorous, this really is a real model that has been developed to try to explain what had been happening. And it brings to mind one of my favorite quotes: not only are ecologies more complex than we imagine, they're more complex than we can imagine. So even this extremely complicated representation probably is missing some components as well. So please know that my previous two slides were highly simplified for purposes of our discussion today, just to make sure we're all on the same page. And so you can see what was happening with seagrasses over time, and you can see that in those after that challenging winter of 2010, look what happened in 2011. I apologize, my pointer is not showing up on the screen, but you can follow along and see what has been happening with seagrasses. Now, our goal for seagrasses is 1943. What was happening in the world in 1943? World War II. So during World War II, Vero Beach had a naval air station, and we were experimenting with a brand new technology, aerial photography. And so we have these amazing aerial photographs of the lagoon, and we can estimate seagrass coverage in 1943. And so we know approximately what it was in 1943, but here's the thing with using 1943. We had already been changing the lagoon even prior to 1943. So it's like if you get to this amazing buffet around noon and it looks so delicious, so many options for you. Had you gotten there at 11 when they opened up, you would have seen how much more full the buffet had been. It's the same thing with us. There's no way of quantifying or even really guessing how much seagrass we had before 1943, but we know that we were already making changes to the lagoon that early. So we know that probably even 1943 was not at its perfect, but that's about when things really started changing. So what is the big deal? Seagrass is tiny. It's not that amazing looking of a plant, that's for sure. But it's extremely important for the health of the lagoon. There are only first of all, there are only like 60 species worldwide, give or take, and there are only 7 species in Florida. And all 7 of those do occur in the Indian River Lagoon. They're considered a barometer of our health of the lagoon, because they are extremely productive as far as biodiversity goes. They are a nursery for marine life. In fact, estuaries in general are nicknamed the cradles of the sea or the ocean's nursery, because much of the juvenile species that become commercially important actually begin their lives in some sort of estuary. And where are those baby things going to find shelter? In seagrass and mangrove roots. They are a food source, both directly for things like manatees and green sea turtles that love to eat seagrass, but they're also an indirect food source, and that fish hide in seagrasses, and then dolphin eat fish, or humans eat fish. They provide shelter. They help with lagoon bottom stabilization. Their roots might not be all that significant, but their modified stems, called rhizomes, are extremely significant. And it's just like a whole bunch of little hands holding on to the bottom of the lagoon. And because of that, they actually stabilize the bottom. And so we can get into a situation where we have this negative feedback loop. If you don't have the seagrass stabilizing the bottom, and a big storm comes through, it stirs up all of that stuff from the benthos, the bottom of the lagoon, thus making it so the sunlight can't penetrate, thus making it so the seagrass can't grow. And so the cloudier the water becomes, the less the seagrass is going to grow. The less seagrass that we have, the cloudier the water can become. It provides oxygen. Remember, plants kind of do the opposite of what we do. So they take in carbon dioxide and they produce oxygen. Everything that lives in the water with gills, it still breathes oxygen. It just gets it from the water instead of from the air like we do. Shoreline protection, when we know that when we find the presence of both seagrass and mangroves, that there's less erosion. So you think about the mangroves because they're so majestic and so in your face, but actually the seagrasses are the first line of defense. And we know that when we have good seagrasses, we have improved water quality. Not only do those roots and rhizomes hold on to the benthos, but the blades can actually help trap suspended sediment and help them settle more quickly to the bottom of the lagoon. And so you might think, well, Heather, you can't say that humans caused those 2 cold winters, and so it seems like everything was totally natural. And so everybody wants to find, like, okay, what was the smoking gun, and what is the silver bullet solution? What is the solution? I'm sorry to tell you, neither of those things exist. And so it's like a death by 1,000 cuts, and we're going to heal it with 1,000 Band-Aids. We're going to do the best we can at our own levels to work on this, because the seagrass cannot recover on its own, and it has led to problems. You probably heard about the unusual mortality event with manatees. Thank goodness manatee deaths have subsided substantially as of today, or as of a couple months ago, so that's a good thing. But we also have pelicans and dolphin and the blue crab harvest and the stone crab harvest are nothing compared to what they once were. And so basically we know that everything iconic about the Indian River Lagoon has been suffering since the seagrass started dying off. And just to kind of put it in a more of a timeline of things, this is what's been happening since then. We have had multiple strange, unusual wildlife mortality events. We have this pattern now where one particular algae will bloom until the conditions change, and then another algae will take over. Our system is not supposed to be an algae-dominated system. Algae is a natural part of the lagoon for sure, but it's supposed to be a seagrass-dominated system. And so those things lead to fish kills, especially up in Brevard County, a massive, alarming fish kill. Again, we're just blooming and busting all of these different strange micro forms of life are blooming and busting, blooming and busting. And so that all leads to what you may have heard about called muck, the stuff on the bottom of the lagoon. And the more population that we have, the thicker this layer of muck becomes. And you might hear a new phrase out there called muck flux. And basically the gist is this muck in its regular decomposition process is also releasing nitrogen into the water. And so if you hear about dredging and muck removal activities, the point is to try and get this unnatural level of muck out of the lagoon, and therefore you're removing one of these nutrient sources out of the lagoon. And so what's really interesting is this is a core sample of the lagoon by Dr. Treffry, and this photo is his. I'm sorry that the photo credit has disappeared from my slide somehow, but these photos are his, and we can look and see that as population has grown dramatically in the 5-county region, look what the bottom of the lagoon has gone from pre-1950 until 2010. And one, you can see how thick the muck layer is, which is pretty alarming. And two, look at the color difference. A lot of the old timers, or even in old literature, you'll hear references to bathtub gin clear water and how amazing and how sandy the bottom was. We don't have that situation today. And so there is a plan. In fact, there are multiple plans, but the Indian River Lagoon National Estuary Program has a comprehensive plan that you can certainly find online if you want. And we have in that plan, which per EPA directive must be updated. In fact, we're working on the update right now, and it's bringing everyone together, as I was talking about earlier, all of the stakeholders together to get everyone's input on helping the lagoon. And the previous gathering of input identified these 6 critical areas that must be addressed first. So we have 32 areas to address, 32 things to work on, and that's a lot. We have to start somewhere. And so after having identified these 32 areas, we figured out which are the 6 most important, the 6 most critical. And so you can see we kind of go down the line from there. And so these are projects that we're sponsoring and that we're encouraging municipalities to undertake, and that we ourselves are undertaking as well. And this is referred to as our Vital Signs Wheel, which you can also find in more detail on our website. But basically, we have 5 competitive requests for proposals annually, including one that's a little out of cycle compared to all the rest. But these are the different categories that we're working on, and your organization might be interested in our small grants. It's less rigorous. It's for a project between $500 and $5,000, and that's to help citizens get involved with projects as well. And if anybody would like to talk about that, we certainly can afterwards. Since 2015, the IRL NEP has participated in 194 projects with our partners, and you can see kind of how they fall out. Most of those projects include multiple counties, but obviously not all of them, and so you can kind of see where the funding has gone. But 194 projects is a lot, by the way. And something that we're particularly excited about right now is our seagrass nursery network, and where we've identified 5 locations on the lagoon to figure out how to plant seagrass, because we don't know how to do it. We don't know, should it be many species altogether? Should it just be one species? Do we plant it densely? Do we try to cover more area? These are questions we do not know how to answer. And so it is true, our water quality right now, lagoon-wide, cannot support the planting of seagrass. But we think there's great hope in at least knowing how to properly plant seagrass, so that as our water quality can start to improve, we can assist in that natural recovery. All scientists say there is no way we're going to plant our way out of this problem. We have to work on all of those 32 vital signs that we looked at. We get to work on all of them. We got to do all of those things. And one of those things is learning the proper ways to plant seagrass. And so that's what these are going to do. Plus, we have to have a supply chain. Plus, we have to have a trained workforce. So we're really excited about the Seagrass Nursery Network. And these are the different places. And right now, the East Coast Zoological Society, a.k.a. the Brevard Zoo, and Florida Oceanographic are doing a lot, and FAU Harbor Branch, doing a lot right now. And if you follow us on social media, we try to highlight those projects that are going on because they're really fun. And by the way, all of those things are looking for volunteers as well. So those were kind of lagoon-wide things. So what's happening right here in your backyards? Well, I know we have some people here from Sebastian today. And so this is an example of a St. Johns River Water Management District project where the water leaves a canal, it goes through a recreated wetlands, which helps to naturally filter the water before it goes into the lagoon. And check out the statistics on this. It's pretty amazing. The amount of debris, nitrogen, and phosphorus that gets removed naturally from the water before it goes into the lagoon. So we used to think that wetlands were a bad thing. We thought they were miasma of disease, and we gave names like the Great Dismal Swamp to places. And we now know swamps and wetlands are actually very important. Not only do they help filter water, but in some instances, that water should have just stayed there and helped to recharge our aquifer. Some of that water naturally would have never made its way to the lagoon. And so we're now realizing how important wetlands are, and so we're using them to our advantage. This is a really cool project with Indian River County Stormwater Division. It's called Egret Marsh, and so they're growing algae on purpose that they harvest and then put the water back into the lagoon. And so the water flows over these really big plastic or concrete mats and treats a lot of water. And then once they remove that algae, you can see the amount, even bigger than a recreated wetlands, the amount of nitrogen and phosphorus that gets removed by the algae. And the county has Osprey Marsh and Osprey Acres. It's almost exactly the same, but even better, because the Osprey Acres side of things looks a lot more natural. And so after it leaves this algae turf scrubber, you can then visit this amazing recreation area. And what I find really encouraging is when we can include the opportunities for recreation and cleaning the lagoon at the same time. And so Spoonbill Marsh and soon to open Moorhen Marsh will also be treating water. But you know what? Indian River County has been thinking about the health of the lagoon way before that winter, that really cold winter that we had. And so I always have to give them props for this strange creation that exists off of the main relief canal. It's at Aviation and US 1. It's a series of screens. So behind these 4 larger screens, behind those 4, I think are 6 or 7 smaller screens. And this thing is amazing. During the dry season, it really just runs once a week, very early in the mornings on Mondays. During rainy season, they have to run it more frequently. But see that fluorescent green plants in the water? That is all freshwater plants. It's growing in the lagoon because there's too much nitrogen, it's growing in the canal because there's too much nitrogen and phosphorus in that canal water to begin with. And so those plants probably wouldn't even be there. And so those screens harvest those plants as well as a lot of trash. And by doing that, check out the amazing results that this thing gets on an annual basis. 637 tons of trash is prevented from going into the lagoon. And then by stopping those freshwater plants from going into the lagoon where they would die in that brackish water, look at how much nitrogen and phosphorus you're removing. These projects are amazing. And 2008 is when this project was completed. This is well before we started losing seagrass. In fact, if you think back to the seagrass graph, 2009 was a banner year for seagrass. And so I always like to give our locals credit for having done this because this was before a big problem even existed. Now, Those projects are amazing, but they're multiple millions of dollars. And citizens can't really do much about those kinds of projects, other than encourage your locally elected officials to pursue those projects, of course. You can attend any kind of public meeting. You can attend it. You can be there, including our meetings. We are a special district of the state, and if you want to know what's going on, please feel free to attend meetings. But there are things that we can do too, because all of the lagoon's problems start on the land. So first of all, I always like to advocate for reduce, reuse, recycle in that order. If you've never been to the MRF, the Materials Resource Facility, it will be eye-opening on how inefficient recycling really is. We need to do it because we're running out of landfill space. Indian River County already had to get emergency permission to open up new cells at our landfill. We are running out of place for our trash to go. So we must recycle, and we must reduce, reuse, and recycle in that order. So don't litter. I can't believe how much litter we still find. So, that's an obvious one. One that maybe isn't so obvious is keeping grass clippings off of the streets, out of the ditches, out of the storm drains. Grass clippings add an enormous amount of nitrogen to our water. And so if we can simply blow those back onto your lawn, or when whoever mows your lawn, if they just have that deflector shield pointed in the proper direction in the first place, back onto the lawn, that's a great fertilizer for your lawn. Ask anyone. Grass clippings are amazing for your lawn. All canals lead to the lagoon. I'm sure you've seen those signs around. We have to pick up our dog waste. This is the most disgusting statistic you'll hear this weekend for sure. 102 tons of dog feces is left on lawns, streets, and sidewalks daily in the 5-county region. Disgusting. Daily, yes, daily. They do contain a little bit of nitrogen and phosphorus. What I find even more troublesome is the amount of harmful bacteria and viruses that are harbored within that waste as well. So please be sure, and if you live in an HOA and you don't have rules about picking up your pet waste, that's something that you might want to think about doing. And lagoon-friendly lawns is a big thing. So there is a statute which says that if you live in an HOA, they may not prohibit you from using Florida-friendly landscaping. Now, here's the deal. I know, you're looking at me with shock. I know. So here's the deal. You still have to follow complete proper procedure of your HOA. Most times that means going to the architectural review board, or there's some sort of process by which you must submit a plant list. So you have to go through the proper procedure, or they will get you on a technicality. You also need to know, what does Florida-friendly mean? Florida-friendly does not mean a lawn of rocks and cacti. So if you put in rocks and cacti and thumb up your nose at your HOA and say you can't do anything about it, well, I'm here to tell you they will sue you and they will win, and you will waste lots of money because you didn't know what that meant. So make sure you're working with someone, or you're doing your research and knowing exactly what that means. And so what I like to encourage, my house is more like the middle photo, kind of wild and woolly, which is not for everyone. But what you can do instead is the far bottom right-hand corner is start replacing small sections of your lawn, and don't try to do too much at once. It can be overwhelming. So just do beautiful, just little, vignettes, if you will, of either native plants or plants that don't require extra watering and fertilizing once they've become established. Or you can go the crazy route, the bottom left-hand corner. You can still maintain a highly manicured lawn and be lagoon friendly. You can do that. I can't imagine the amount of work that takes. But there are actually Florida native plants like privet and cocoa plum that handle extreme manicuring very well. And all of that can help you reduce all of your inputs into your lawns and gardens, because over-fertilization, meaning we don't know how to use fertilizer properly, that's what created that neon blanket green of plants in that canal. It's people not using fertilizers properly. And depending on which project that we are talking about, Florida DEP now estimates that about 25 pounds of fertilizer on your lawn or on your gardens over time, the cost to you is minimal, but removing that from the water once it gets there is slightly over $9,000 to remove it. So the point is, wouldn't it be better and more economical if we could just stop it in the first place? Because that's really the problem with the lagoon, is too many nutrients. So everything that we can do to put the lagoon on a nutrient diet is going to help. What else can you do? Well, I don't know how many of you have a septic tank, and I don't want to call anyone out, but if you do have one, please know that there is a proper way to maintain them, and they're not a great solution for Florida in general. We have very sandy, porous soils. And so septics are really intended for low-density development in a different kind of soil than we have. Unfortunately, they are here, and they're very expensive to replace. We know that traditional septic tanks are leaching about 9 pounds of nitrogen per person per year into the lagoon. And so what do you know about yours? How old is it? Are you having it inspected? Are you having it pumped out as needed? Do you check the outlet T? Do you hose off your trap? Do you even know what those things are? So if you do have a septic tank, and you can find this on EPA, this is a very basic drawing of a septic tank. I encourage you to learn about that and know where are these things, so that when you call in an expert, you have a little bit of knowledge yourself, and so you know how to, at least the basics of how it works. And the whole point is you want to minimize that sludge layer so that your tank has more room for the wastewater. And so there are things that we all do that maybe we shouldn't do, and there are things that we do that are fine for septics. And so all of these things, in green, those are okay for septics. What's not okay is all this stuff in red. And some things that are always surprising people is a garbage disposal. A garbage disposal and a septic tank are not really compatible, because with a garbage disposal, you are contributing to that sludge layer even faster. And so it is, believe it or not, more environmentally friendly for food waste to go to the landfill than it is to go to your septic tank. Now, even better, of course, would be composting. Now, we don't have commercial composting capability in this county yet. I know that it is being talked about, but we don't have that available to us. And so, backyard composting is not something that we have to be afraid of. Decomposition happens. I mean, whether you build your bin perfect or not, stuff is going to decompose. And so that would be the best way to deal with all of your uneaten food. Also, doing back-to-back loads of laundry. You actually overwhelm the system. I know it's more efficient. Oh, it's laundry day. Let's just knock it out and get it all done. But doing back-to-back loads of laundry when you have a septic tank overwhelms the capability of your septic tank. So just think about, because that seems so innocuous, right? Laundry, think about what you're doing and what you're expecting from your septic tank. So really examine your life. Are you living lagoon friendly? Do you practice the 3 R's? What type of lawn do you have, and how do you maintain it? If you have a septic tank, how much do you know about it? Do you have a dog? Do you pick up after it? And basically, what is the environmental crisis if not a crisis of the way we live? The big problem is nothing more or less than the sum total of countless little everyday choices, and sooner or later it will have to be addressed at that level in our yards, in our kitchens, and our minds. So we can't rely on government to do it all. Government needs us to do our part too. We as citizens don't have millions of dollars to do projects, but we do all of these things. And another final thing that you could do, our brand new plate is out. It just as of last week. So $125,000 annually goes towards restoration projects from the sale of this license plate. I can't wait to update mine because I have the old one on my car. so I can't wait to get this one. It's here. And so it is an extra $15 annually to you, and then that money goes towards lagoon restoration projects. And with that, I will gladly open it to any questions. Oh my gosh, that was like instantaneous. We'll start over here. Yes.
So I'm from Sebastian, and I understand the Marriott's going to be building a hotel on the river, and they're going to be dumping their pool water into the lagoon. So I'm wondering what we can do about that. I mean, I don't know how to start,
Become.
campaign,
You don't know how to start. I'm sorry. What?
a campaign against.
So the question is what to do about a future potential hotel that in Sebastian that's going to be located on the lagoon. The best advice I can give you is get involved with your city government, the city of Sebastian, talk to your elected officials, perhaps consider serving on the Natural Resources Board. That's a volunteer committee that meets in the evenings, so even working people could participate in that. Attend the Natural Resources Board meetings if you can. And if you can't, I must say the city of Sebastian is fantastic about live streaming all of their meetings, whether it's just a committee meeting or the city council itself. They do a great job of live streaming all of that. And so those kinds of really big projects, if you want to have input, then you have to be in touch with your locally elected officials.
So, like the EPA wouldn't get involved in something like that, is it zoning situation?
I don't know anything about that specific thing. I know that the plans, I hadn't heard anything about what they will do with their pool water.
It was in the Sebastian the article.
That's interesting. So I would start talking to your locally elected officials and finding out. The City of Sebastian Natural Resources Board. Yes, unfortunately, you can't.
All the live oaks. I mean, the small piece of land has these gorgeous trees.
Mhm.
I mean, it's frustrating.
Yes, so you are allowed to, yeah. So the Mangrove Protection Act is much stronger now than even that it was in the early 90s. And so the fines now for getting caught taking out illegally taking out mangroves, it is much more substantial than that. You can still have a permit to do certain activities though. And if you're curious, I would suggest looking up the Mangrove Protection Act. We have another question over here. Or at least spacing it out by a few hours. Yes, at least spacing it out. Yes.
You talked about the screening system that was put up in 2009 and the numbers were far superior. Why don't we just put those?
Well, because we don't so the question for those of you at home is why don't we just do more of those screening projects like the one that's on the main relief canal in Indian River County? We only have 3 main canals in Indian River County, the north, the main, and the south, so somewhat limited there, and not all of stormwater runoff goes through a canal, and it was extremely expensive. It was a very expensive project, and I would imagine now it would even be more expensive with as much of inflation, especially on materials, as happened. So it's amazing. And at the time that that was invented, it existed nowhere else in the world. Absolutely groundbreaking and amazing. But wouldn't it be great if we could just stop the problem from occurring in the first place? So it's a great solution, but there's a way to prevent the problem, not solve the problem. And if we can get to a point where we can prevent problems, that will always be more impactful. Way back in the back.
So about, I guess, 10 years ago, there was a project to replace all of the septic systems with sewer. And I noticed that your RFPs, this is specifically to the RFPs. Have you heard anything more about that? I mean, that's a major problem that could be resolved.
Major problem.
Supporting people who would like,
Right.
but I don't even have the ability to connect.
Right. Right.
So it seems like that would help.
Yes, so anyone who's live streaming and maybe didn't hear the question was, what kind of help is there towards getting folks off of septic and onto sewer? Because that would have a huge positive impact for the lagoon. Some places, some municipalities are being very aggressive with septic to sewer conversions, some not as much. Martin County has removed over 500 homes recently. Brevard County is on their way. Brevard County citizens actually voted to tax themselves. It's a 50-cent sales tax for 10 years. And at the end of that 10 years, they will have collected something like $53 million for all 4 lagoon projects, and they're getting themselves, it's difficult, but they're getting there. The city of Vero Beach just recently had a nice relationship come together with some nonprofits to help the folks along Atlantic Boulevard get off of septic and onto a hybrid system, which will also help. These projects are extremely expensive. It would be very difficult for a homeowner to be able to foot the bill to get off of septic and onto sewer, and that is assuming that a sewer line were even available for you to connect to in the first place. Some places don't yet even have a sewer line to connect to. And then let's say somehow magically we all got off of septic and connected to sewer. Is our wastewater treatment system ready to handle that huge influx of homes? I mean, just because I am on sewer doesn't mean that I'm faultless. I bet you anything there are probably leaks in my sewer lines. My house was built in 1959. Oh, exactly. So I could be contributing to the problem just as much as a septic tank does. And so for those of us who have septic tanks, managing them as best that we can, if you just cannot get off of your septic tank, start with this stuff and advocate for yourselves at those local government meetings that you want to make this happen for sure. Unfortunately, the city of Sebastian won a grant from us. They had an excellent proposal, and they had to return the money. They could only get 20 entities on US 1 interested to get off of septic, 20 entities. And so they returned a large portion of a grant from the IRL NEP, specifically targeting septic because they couldn't get buy-in. There will always be some cost to the homeowner. And let's face it, a lot of people on fixed incomes, even that small cost can be prohibitive. It's going to be challenging, especially considering the number of septic tanks that are in the 5-county region, for sure. Yes?
Along the lagoon now, any buildings, do they have to be connected to sewer, or can they still do septic?
Yes.
The houses, because I know into that, River Drive, there's a house that I never thought
Should,
would be able to build anything on.
yeah.
They're small.
Mm-hmm.
Where would that would be allowed for them to have a septic?
Mm-hmm. Yes. 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 So all I can suggest is that we be more participatory in the local process. it's disheartening, yes.
How safe is it to swim in the lagoon?
So our problem with the lagoon is really a nutrient problem, which is weird for us to think about. It's not a pollution problem. It's not like we have some factory somewhere and there's a pipe, putting industrial waste into our lagoon. The problem in our lagoon is mostly nitrogen and phosphorus. Having said that, there are things that occur naturally in a lagoon that can cause infections, and so if you are immunocompromised, you need to be careful. If you get cut by a oyster or a barnacle, you need to be extremely careful. If you are a fisherman, and you should be careful when handling the dorsal spines of fish, if you are also immunocompromised, if you have liver issues, if you have diabetes. There are things that you should definitely keep in mind if you want to recreate in the lagoon that are probably there no matter what. I am an immunocompromised individual, and I've had some really nasty infections exactly from that, from getting cuts in the lagoon. And, the closer you are to an inlet, the better the water quality is.
I want to ask about bioremediation
Mm-hmm.
and what you feel is your preferred projects. I see that there was a project with Spoonbill Marsh,
Mm-hmm.
floating treatment centers, and also planting mangroves along shorelines, and even the creation of these small islands. Do you feel like there's anything that's doable and feasible?
So the question is about bioremediation or just letting nature help us. Nature is always going to be a tool to help us if we allow it. So yes, any chance that we get to revegetate shorelines with native plants, it will definitely be beneficial for sure. Anytime we can slow down the water from getting into the lagoon, or just even slow it down from getting into that swale. And so things like buffer zones around stormwater ponds are critical. And by the way, they're part of our local fertilizer ordinances. Stormwater ponds should have a 10-foot low maintenance zone, which is really not being mowed regularly. It's being allowed for those plants to be taller to slow that water down, help filter out the nutrients and the sediments before it even gets to the stormwater pond. So there's a lot of benefit for working with nature, for sure. And that's something that we can all do in our yards. We all know where the ditch is. We all know where the swale is. We all know how the water moves off of our property. And so the more we can slow that down with attractive clumping of plantings, the better. The better that's going to be for the lagoon. Mm-hmm.
Recently, one of the companies that I had, which fertilizes my lawn, has stated that they, because the fertilizing system of every 2 months didn't give the customer the lawn that they wanted or required. They are now upping that, 3 months, every 3 months. They're lowering it to fertilizing every 2 months.
So the question is about fertilizer and how often need it be applied. And so we did find in Indian River County that the big companies are following the ordinances. It's mostly homeowners that aren't following the fertilizer ordinances. And of course, it's a lot harder to keep track of the homeowners than it is the big companies. So it's not necessarily the frequency that they apply, but what they are applying. And so during rainy season, of course, that needs to be different than the non-rainy season. It needs to be slow release nitrogen instead of quick release. And then it's kind of up to us. If you're not happy and you hired the company, then you can also do the opposite and stop using that company. So that, vote with your wallet right there. And I challenge people to think about what we define as beautiful. Why has a well-manicured, expansive green lawn become the standard of beauty? Why is that beautiful? It's not to me. It is to some people. So the question is why? And how do we encourage more plant diversity in yards? And how do we encourage the acceptance of that kind of beauty? Which ultimately is going to help all kinds of things in the environment, not just the lagoon. I felt like did you have another call? Oh, I'm sorry.
Just out of curiosity, how approximately, I'm sure there's some information about it, how far
all the way from west of I-95. Yeah. And remember, too, we've increased, there's land west of I-95 that should have drained naturally to the St. Johns River, or that should have been a permanent wetland. It's supposed to be a swamp. We drained all that. So we have artificially augmented or increased the amount of land draining into the lagoon than ever would have happened naturally. Now, had we been having this discussion 20 years ago, and I did have this discussion 20 years ago, can we do about the canals? I would have said, well, the canals are here to stay. There's nothing we can do except for maybe put the screening in. They're here to stay. Well, guess what? I was wrong, and I'm so happy to admit that I was wrong, because the flow of canals is now being rediverted west. It is a massive undertaking. St. John's is rediverting canals that really should have always been draining to the west. They've stopped the flow, like Turkey Creek, C1 Canal, all of that. So we now, you can't judge past actions based on present knowledge. We thought wetlands were bad. We just want to drain the land so we get rid of mosquitoes, we get rid of disease, we can do our agriculture here, So it's happening. We just have to please be patient. And please, my assignment to you is to help me dispel that myth that how come no one's doing nothing? It's just not true. It's going to take a long time, but lots of people are doing lots of things. The citizens of Brevard County voted to tax themselves specifically for the health of the lagoon. The citizens of Indian River County recently renewed our environmental lands bond, where we can start acquiring even more land in Indian River County. Keep those things up, get as involved, as your schedule allows you to be, and know that it's up to all of us. We all get to play a part in this.
Yeah, what you just said, exactly what I've heard from my son, who is a marine biologist for the state of Florida. And he said, Mom, things are being done, the money is being used, it just takes time. We didn't get this way in a short time. But my concern now, because I've lived here so long, I've seen growth codes, but we're in a big growth code. I mean, out Route 60 built 3 stories, apartments, they're calling them apartments, not condos, so I don't know if that means families are gonna live there. But for the new growth, and what are we doing educating the people moving to Florida now to let them know? Those are my concerns. They come down and say, oh, look at Disney, and look at all these beautiful lawns, and this is what I want in my Florida lawn. That they're seeing that, and they're not looking at the old folks here.
Well, I need all of you to help me educate them. That we now have 3 community engagement coordinators for the IRL NEP, and we're obviously not the only entity doing education, about the lagoon, but invite me everywhere and anywhere you want. I won't say no unless it just plain old doesn't fit into my schedule. If you have a speaking event, or if you live in one of the other counties that I don't represent, my colleagues, we'll get you somebody. We'll get you to, if it's your civic organization or just a ladies group that likes to drink wine, hey, we'll be there too. If you're ready for education, we're ready to chat.
In here, the city marina, there are all those boats that are anchored out there off the marina, all those sailboats. And we know that those people aren't dinghying into the bathrooms. Do they make sure that they have holding tanks? Is there any control over that?
So technically, the entirety of the lagoon is in a no discharge zone. So the law does exist. I mean, our problem frequently arises from enforcement capabilities, and let's face it, the environment doesn't have a lot of enforcement going on. Yes. What concerns me more than a mooring field, though, is all of the folks that are mooring elsewhere that don't even have the opportunity to be easily pumped out. And so in the mooring field, there is a pump out service. They have to pay for it, and they're supposed to be doing it. But if you're not even in that mooring field, it's they are. It's not. Yeah, that's not. I don't know.
I read somewhere that that's like the most contaminated portion of the lagoon anywhere.
That's not true. That's definitely not true. Yeah. I would suggest, for those of you who would like to know about different nutrient levels in different portions of the lagoon, Dr. Witter's organization called ORCA, they're mapping the lagoon and they're mapping the pollution hotspots. And the central lagoon is actually better. You know, we don't have to deal with the Lake Okeechobee releases in this part of the lagoon. So at least we have that in our favor. That's pretty low standard, but yes. So Lake Okeechobee releases don't affect this far north in the lagoon.
My concern would be like in St. Lucie County where the Fort Pierce Inlet is and all those marinas they built in the last 5 years over there. I'm just devastated. I remember when there was no seawall there and I used to go stay in Swift to feed my seahorse. I had a pet seahorse. And now they put sea walls and then they got rid of all that stuff and now they got those marinas. I mean, that's not, that, you know.
I mean, the more there is a threat of loving something to death, right? So the more we use it, the more impact we have on it, for sure. But believe it or not, the majority of the impact is still coming from land, not coming from the marine industry. Yeah, it really is. And so let's dig into what we can dig into and let's solve those problems that are a little bit easier to handle because they're going to have a big return for us.
With those marinas and stuff, they're building hotels and, I mean, it is
Yeah, yeah.
because they're not gonna live on the boats, they're gonna have that so they can go out to the inlet, but they wanna live somewhere in all these multi-highways.
You know, luckily, low-impact development is gaining some traction where you condense a high density of development because you're preserving more land as well. And let's hope that that gains a little bit more traction.
And then you have so much knowledge about all this. I just recently moved to Sebastian, like 2 years ago, so I'm not real familiar with the local government. I'm wondering, how receptive have you found them to listen to the local residents in terms of,
You know, I think with everything, it's all about relationships. And so don't just attend something when you have a complaint. Attend something when you have a little kudos to give as well. I mean, you know, I subscribe to the more fly with honeys than vinegar philosophy to life and, you know, approach it that way and just start to get to know people before you start bringing them complaints. Thank you so much, everyone, for having me today. And please contact me, and I'll be happy to do more. I'll put my email back up. Oops.
Thank you, Heather.
Thank you.
This was amazing.
Good.
An amazing talk, and I really feel your passion, and I think it radiated to all of us. And we're going to give you a little gift certificate to our Zendan.
I was just looking at that. How exciting.
Yes, so we want to give that to you as a special thank you.
Thank you.
And now we're going to do our door prizes.
Okay.
Unless there's anything else anyone wants to bring up?